A staged referendum is underway in 4 areas of Ukraine occupied by invading Russian forces. People there being forced to vote on whether the regions should become part of Russia. The entire process under the control of the Russian government and occupying forces. The U.S., Europe, NATO, the world, many countries slam the move as sham elections. This comes as Vladimir Putin faces an uprising from his own people over his planned mobilization. And the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is saying he wants Russians to revolt against their government.
That's right. Putin's draft order sparking huge angry protests across the country, leading to more than 1,300 arrests. And now some Russians are leaving the country entirely, one way or another. As men try to escape this war, we are seeing long lines of traffic build up at border crossings in several neighboring countries. As for those who are deciding to try to fight, they are saying goodbye to loved ones as they leave behind their families to board buses for military service. So let's begin in Ukraine. Our international security editor, Nick Payton-Walsh, joins us from Kramatorsk. Nick, what can you tell us from the ground?
Yeah, certainly these, I can't even call them votes, to be honest. Handing out of ballots appears to be underway. Images showing that in multiple areas. It's important to point out that this is happening under wartime conditions, under the gun certainly, and that these ballot boxes are being taken to people's homes. Essentially, an occupying force going to your front door and saying, do you want to vote yes to join part of Russia or not? Pretty clear what the outcome would be. As they used to say in the Soviet time, it doesn't really matter who votes, it's who counts the votes. Well, we may not even see that many people even voting here. There's only one day over the next 4 days where in-person voting at ballot stations seem to be even happening. But this follows a long pattern, frankly, of how Russia functions in what it used to call managed democracy, much less even of a pretense, frankly, here. Effectively, the concern here is what happens when the results have been announced. Western officials saying the toll's actually already been decided. Does Russia use this move? And the Kremlin have indicated today that they will quite likely fast recognize these areas as part of Russia. Do they use that extra status to allow some sort of extra part of their arsenal to be brought into play? Does it enable them to do other things? Can they use Russian conscripts, for example, on territory which they now consider to be part of Russia? Or do they reach further into the darker parts of their military arsenal? Key questions, but certainly in those occupied parts of Ukraine, we are hearing Ukrainian officials saying don't vote, report bids to try and make you vote, and even in one rare town in Kherson region, Snihurivka, a protest against that referendum. Startling bravery.
Nick, you described the calculus here and the concern, as U.S. officials expressed, that Russia will now treat these areas as Russian territory and therefore might escalate in some way. I'm curious, does this affect Ukrainian war plans, the Ukrainian military agenda from the commanders, the officials you speak to?
As far as we can see on the ground, absolutely not at all. In fact, round here, they are moving forwards in certain areas. We saw very high morale yesterday. There's one exception, the town of Bakhmut, which we are seeing Russia getting some traction moving into that key city with potentially tens of thousands of civilians still inside there. But on the whole, Russia's losing on the front line. And that brings into question, Jim, exactly the impact of this, quote, partial mobilization that Putin has ordered. Probably the most risky and strident move of his 22 years effectively running the Russian government. And, you know, there are many signs of protest across the country. It's so hard to try and define how consistent dissent is, how widespread it is, because of the role of state propaganda blasting into homes through TV screens, because of how pervasive the security services are in crushing dissent. But Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky seizing upon this dissent to basically say to Russians, run, desert, or let yourselves be taken prisoner. Here's what he had to say.
Russia's decision on mobilization is a frank admission that the regular army, which has been prepared for decades to take over a foreign country, did not withstand and crumbled.
So essentially, we are into a few weeks ahead here where Russia has to put these tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands, they claim, of forced conscripts, some it seems not having that much military experience, onto a front line and supply, train, equip them in a way that it hasn't really effectively done for its regular army over the past 6 months. That's a startling challenge ahead of them, one which they probably will not succeed on as they faltered in most steps of the war here too. Leading to this next question, does Putin suddenly feel now that the nuclear weapons or other parts of his arsenal that he stayed well away from over the past 6 months might come into play? I have to get that answer scarily soon. Jim?
Nick Payton-Walsh, thank you. So important to have you on the ground there, exactly where this is happening. Thanks very much for all that reporting.
Let's bring in Mary Lushina, who covers Russia and the region for the Washington Post. Nice to see you, Mary. Thanks for getting up early with us this morning. Talk to me about the resistance to this mobilization in Russia. What are you hearing from inside the country from people who are worried about this? And is it, I wonder, an admission from Vladimir Putin that this is not a limited military operation? This is a full-blown war.
Good morning, Christine. As the that not is going as smoothly as the Kremlin had hoped, and also how it portrayed this special military operation to the people of Russia for the past 7 months. And now they're feeling very direct impact of that because their lives have been uprooted within a span of a couple hours. Some people I spoke to on Wednesday who got the summonses on the day of the mobilization, they already left for training on Thursday night. How quickly that all unfolded for them, and they just had to leave their homes and go to training and then to war. People are, trying to do whatever they can to avoid it. Some people are fleeing the country. If you have a passport or a visa, you're probably in a good spot. Some people are organizing for another round of demonstrations on the weekend, so we're likely to see more protests tomorrow. Generally, there is a lot of panic, chaos, and resistance.
I know some of the reporting was that those earlier protests this week, protesters were being, detained and then conscripted, put into the war effort. Putin has called for a partial mobilization. The number we know is 300,000 reservists called to the battlefield. You think there's a possibility it's bigger than that? Why?
There is a lot of concern that it is bigger than that because of just how many people are being rounded up in not necessarily Moscow and St. Petersburg, because there's a lot of people, they're more prone to protest and they're more active politically, but there are a lot of people in far eastern regions and some smaller, poorer regions of Russia that don't get much media coverage, but there are so many reports of people just rounded up in 30, 40 people from one small settlement. So there is concern that is way more. Russian outlet Novaya Gazeta Europe reported yesterday that there is this secret decree in the presidential decree that Putin issued on Wednesday that says it actually could be up to 1 million people. There's no other confirmation of that, but they've cited a source within the Kremlin. So it definitely brewing as a very much full mobilization. And also we know from just previous experience in this war that Russian authorities, when they give a number, it's quite often is not actually true, especially when it comes to the casualties that Russia sustained throughout this campaign. They say less than 6,000 people died, 6,000 soldiers, but that number is likely much, much higher.
Yeah. Sources telling CNN, so this is CNN's reporting, Mary, that Russian officers are complaining about Moscow's decision-making and intervention, and they're arguing among themselves, complaining about Moscow's intervention, but arguing on the battlefield themselves. What do you make of that and what it says about who's in charge?
That's been a problem that plagued the Russian army for months, probably from the very beginning, because the chain of command is really unclear. Russia never publicly said who is actually the operational commander of this whole massive operation, this front line that stretches for kilometers. It was never clear. And from the soldiers, that I spoke to and that, spoke to other media, it was clear that, right when they went into this attack, they didn't really understand what was going on. And that persisted throughout everything they did, because it was last minute calls to do something. There was complete chaos. And that seems to have culminated in this massive setback that Russian army has suffered in the previous weeks in northeastern Ukraine, where they, just were annihilated there by the Ukrainian counteroffensive and had to leave a lot of the places. And this is why partially they're moving so quickly with these referendums that Ben spoke about earlier.
Yeah, let's talk about that quickly, because what's Putin trying to achieve there in these occupied Ukraine regions, trying to solidify sort of his stake on those areas?
Yes, it's one thing. One side of that is that he has to tell the Russian public that he is succeeding at something in this campaign. He did not take the entire Ukraine or Kiev in a short amount of time, but he liberated those areas from Ukrainian neo-Nazis, as the Kremlin likes to say, and that they are bringing these Russian-speaking people home. That's the whole narrative here. And the second thing, like strategically, what people are worried about, that once these regions are part of Russia officially in the eyes of the Russian law, that will allow Vladimir Putin to be even more aggressive with his attack, because any attack on those territories will be already considered not just some areas in a different country, but attack on Russia, and that could potentially lead to another round of escalation. He's alluded to Russia's nuclear arsenal. He's mentioned it before. It's not the first time he's threatened with that in such a manner, but this is a very obviously stark and concerning development.
All right, Mary Luciana, Washington Post. Thank you so much for your expertise and your time this morning. Thank you.